Began writing Don Juan in 1818. He had, as he admitted to one of his friends, no plan. In fact, he said, "My only plan is to have no plan." And we see that in the poem. It seems to meander, digress based on the whims of the author, less about an important narrative and more about the fluctuations of the narrator's mind. The real drama of the piece, one might say, doesn't come from the story about Don Juan, but comes more from how the narrator decides to tell the story. And one way he decides to tell the story is simply to, at least in fiction, to let his mind go where it will. So the poem has a kind of improvisational feel, a spontaneous feel, as if it's being made up as it goes along. Byron also said, famously, that he had, more than any other belief in his life, a strong love of liberty and a hatred of cant. Now, I talked about this a little bit in an earlier lecture, how one way that Byron celebrates liberty is by criticizing various blockages to liberty. And for Byron, one of the primary blockages to liberty is cant, sanctimonious hypocrisy, people performing behaviors that they think are socially acceptable as opposed to following some more idiosyncratic interior impulse that would distinguish them as individuals. Sanctimonious hypocrisy, put another way, is a mode of conformity. So we see in Don Juan Byron expressing his strong love of liberty by writing with no plan or appearing to write with no plan, just going wherever whim takes him, but also mocking all kinds of forms of sanctimonious hypocrisy. So, really, the poem, in addition to having no plan, is also simply a long series of mockeries of various forms of cant that the narrator, will say, slash Byron, sees in the society around him. So when we see characters trying to appear learned when they're really not, or when we see characters try to appear moral when they're really not, this is Byron mocking Kant. But it's deeper than that. He's also interested in how we fool ourselves, uh, how we repress, let's say, our desires by deceiving ourselves that we're behaving in a socially acceptable way. For instance, erotic desire in Don Juan. We often see characters try to talk themselves out of erotic desire, saying, "Oh well, I'm just good friends with Don Juan. It's a totally platonic relationship. So because it's a totally platonic relationship, I can just reach over and hold his hand, and I'm only doing this out of friendship." When in fact, this idea of platonic friendship is just a front. It's a way that a character might try to deceive herself into saying she doesn't have a right desire for this character when in fact she does. And of course, the deception, her deceiving herself, ultimately means that when the erotic desire comes out, it will come out even stronger than if she had expressed it, and it will overwhelm her. So, what I'm saying is that Byron is not only mocking external cant, let's say, the way that we or characters in the poem conform our behaviors to the conventions of our society, often to the detriment of expressing our more individualistic impulses. But also, Byron's interested in what we might call internal cant, the way that we deceive ourselves, the way we try to justify our behaviors or talk ourselves out of our desired behaviors. That we don't allow ourselves full self knowledge because we don't want to see the full truth of ourselves. So we can be kind of inner hypocrites, if you will. So that's the second major part of the poem. First, planning to have no plan. Two, Byron expressing his strong love of liberty and his detestation of cant. Now, a third component of the poem that Byron himself articulated he said to a friend, I wanted to be a little quietly facetious upon everything. Now, this is just another way of saying, to some extent, what I've said earlier in this talk, that the main impulse of the poem is not so much to tell a story, it is not so much to convey a moral or an ideology. Instead, it's simply to look at the world in a slightly mocking, deflationary way. In other words, almost all of human behavior is, at the end of the day, mockable.